there's a quiet confusion that many people carry but rarely question. They notice the distance, the hesitation, the subtle tension in conversations, but they interpret it the wrong way. They think, maybe I'm not enough. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if your presence, your energy, your way of thinking, your authenticity creates a mirror that others aren't ready to face? Growth is often romanticized as something uplifting, empowering, and universally celebrated. But in reality, growth can be quiet, isolating, and at times deeply misunderstood. When you begin to change internally, your values, your standards, your way of thinking, it doesn't always create visible conflict. There are no loud arguments, no dramatic endings, no clear moment where everything falls apart. Instead, something more subtle happens. A space begins to form. Conversations lose their depth. Shared interests begin to fade. What once felt natural starts to feel forced. And the most confusing part is that no one can quite explain why. This distance is not always intentional. It is not necessarily caused by disagreement or dislike. It is often the natural result of moving in different directions without realizing it at the same pace. As you grow, your perspective shifts. You start questioning things you once accepted without hesitation. You become more selective about how you spend your time, who you give your energy to, and what kind of conversations you engage in. The things that once entertained you may no longer feel meaningful. The dynamics that once felt comfortable may begin to feel limiting. At the same time, the people around you may still be operating within the same patterns you have started to outgrow. This does not make them wrong, and it does not make you better. It simply creates a difference in awareness, and awareness changes everything. It changes how you listen, how you respond, how you tolerate certain behaviors, and how you define connection. What once felt like belonging may now feel like compromise. This is where intimidation quietly enters the picture, not as something aggressive or intentional, but as a byproduct of contrast. Your growth reflects a possibility that others may not be ready to face. It shows that change is possible, that comfort can be challenged, that patterns can be broken. And for someone who is not ready to confront those ideas, your presence alone can feel unsettling. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because you represent a shift they have not chosen. Sometimes this manifests in small but noticeable ways. People may become more distant, less engaged, or subtly defensive. They may dismiss your ideas, change the subject, or avoid deeper conversations altogether. It is not always conscious. In many cases, they do not even realize what is happening. They simply feel uncomfortable, and instead of exploring that discomfort, they create distance from its source. For you, this can be deeply confusing. You may find yourself questioning whether you have changed too much, whether you have become difficult to connect with, or whether you should adjust yourself to restore what once felt easy. There is a strong temptation to go back, to simplify yourself, to ignore the growth that created this gap in the first place. Because returning to familiarity feels safer than standing alone in something new. But growth does not reverse without cost. When you try to shrink back into old versions of yourself, you create an internal conflict. You begin to silence thoughts that have already awakened. You tolerate situations that no longer align with who you are becoming. You pretend not to see what you now clearly understand, and over time, that disconnect within yourself becomes heavier than the distance you feel from others. The invisible distance created by growth is not a failure of connection. It is a transformation of it. It is a natural filtering process that separates what is aligned with who you are becoming from what belonged to who you used to be. And while it may feel like loss in the moment, it is also making space for something more compatible, more honest, and more sustainable in the long run. Authenticity is often praised as one of the most admirable qualities a person can have. People talk about it as if it were simple, as if it were just a matter of being yourself, without hesitation or fear. But authenticity is not always comfortable, and it is rarely neutral in its effect on others. When you choose to be genuine in a world that often rewards performance, you quietly disrupt the expectations that most people rely on to feel secure. You stop playing roles that others have unconsciously agreed upon, and in doing so, you introduce an element of unpredictability that can make people uneasy. Most social interactions are built on subtle agreements. There are things we say because they are expected, emotions we hide because they are inconvenient, and opinions we soften because we want to be accepted. These patterns create a sense of stability. People know what to expect from each other, and that predictability makes interactions feel safe. But when you show up authentically, you begin to break those patterns. You speak with clarity instead of ambiguity. You express what you truly think instead of what is socially convenient. You choose honesty over approval, even when it creates tension. This kind of presence does not go unnoticed. Even if you are calm, respectful, and thoughtful, your authenticity can feel like a disruption to those who are used to navigating relationships through pretense. It challenges the invisible rules they follow. It raises questions they may not want to ask themselves. It exposes the gap between who they are and who they present to the world. And that exposure, even when unintentional, can create discomfort. What makes this dynamic more complex is that the discomfort is rarely acknowledged directly. People do not usually say, "Your honesty makes me question myself," or "Your authenticity makes me feel insecure." Instead, the reaction takes other forms. They may label you as intense, blunt, difficult, or hard to read. They may interpret your clarity as criticism, even when no criticism was intended. They may distance themselves not because they dislike you, but because being around you requires a level of self-awareness they are not ready to engage with. Authenticity also removes the usual signals that people depend on to navigate social situations. When you are not seeking approval, not adjusting your behavior to fit expectations, and not mirroring others to create comfort, it becomes harder for them to predict how you will respond. This unpredictability is not dangerous, but it feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity often translates into caution. People may hold back, become more guarded, or avoid deeper interaction altogether. At the same time, your authenticity can create a silent pressure, not because you demand anything from others, but because your way of being suggests that something more honest is possible. It invites a level of openness that requires courage. And for someone who is used to protecting themselves through roles and masks, that invitation can feel overwhelming. It is easier to step away than to step into that level of vulnerability. For you, this can lead to a sense of confusion. You may feel that you are simply being real, yet the reactions you receive do not always reflect appreciation or understanding. You may wonder if you are too direct, too expressive, or too different. There can be moments where it feels like authenticity creates more distance than connection, where being genuine does not bring people closer, but instead makes them retreat. This is where it becomes important to recognize that authenticity is not universally comfortable. It does not guarantee immediate acceptance, and it does not always create easy relationships. What it does is reveal alignment. It shows who is willing to meet you at that level of honesty and who is not. It filters interactions in a way that may feel challenging at first, but it brings a deeper sense of clarity to the connections you form. When you remain authentic, you are not forcing others to change, but you are no longer participating in the illusions that keep interactions superficial. You are choosing to stand in what is real, even if it disrupts what is familiar. And that choice, while quiet, carries a powerful impact on the people around you, whether they understand it or not. Confidence is often misunderstood as something loud, visible, and easy to identify. Many people associate it with strong opinions, dominant behavior, or a constant need to prove oneself. But the kind of confidence that truly unsettles others is much quieter. It does not demand attention, and it does not seek validation. It exists in the way you carry yourself, in the calmness of your decisions, and in the clarity with which you define your boundaries. This form of confidence does not try to convince anyone of its worth, and that is precisely what makes it so powerful. When you are confident without arrogance, you move through the world with a sense of inner stability. You do not feel the need to explain every choice you make or justify every belief you hold. You are comfortable with who you are, even when others do not fully understand you. This creates a presence that is grounded and self-contained. You are not trying to compete, impress, or dominate, but you are also not shrinking yourself to make others feel more comfortable. You simply exist as you are, and that alone can create a quiet tension in social interactions. For many people, confidence is something they are still trying to build. It is often tied to external factors such as approval, recognition, or comparison. They feel secure when they are praised, when they fit in, or when they are perceived in a certain way. But when they encounter someone who does not rely on those external signals, it can disrupt their understanding of what confidence looks like. Your calm certainty becomes a contrast to their internal doubts, and that contrast can feel intimidating. What makes this dynamic more subtle is that your confidence does not attack or challenge others directly. It does not criticize, judge, or compete. Yet, it still creates an internal reaction. People may begin to question themselves in your presence, even if you have said nothing that invites comparison. They may wonder if they are measuring up, if they are being perceived in a certain way, or if they are lacking something you seem to have. This internal dialogue is not caused by anything you are doing wrong, but by what your presence represents. Boundaries play a significant role in this kind of confidence. When you are clear about what you accept and what you do not, you remove the ambiguity that many people rely on to navigate relationships. You do not tolerate behavior that goes against your values, and you do not compromise your sense of self to maintain approval. This clarity can be uncomfortable for those who are used to flexible or undefined boundaries. It forces a level of accountability that they may not be prepared for, and instead of adjusting, they may distance themselves. Another aspect that contributes to this intimidation is your lack of need for validation. When you are not seeking reassurance, compliments, or constant feedback, it changes the dynamic of interaction. Many social exchanges are built on mutual reinforcement, where people give and receive validation to maintain a sense of connection. But when you are internally secure, you do not depend on this exchange in the same way. This can make others feel unsure of how to engage with you, as if the usual rules no longer apply. Your confidence also affects the way you handle uncertainty and challenges. Instead of reacting with visible doubt or anxiety, you approach situations with a sense of trust in your ability to adapt. You may not have all the answers, but you are not threatened by that. This calm approach can be misinterpreted as detachment or superiority, even though it is simply a reflection of your inner stability. People may assume that you see yourself as above certain concerns, when in reality, you have just learned not to be controlled by them. For someone who is still navigating their own insecurities, this kind of presence can feel overwhelming. It highlights the areas where they feel uncertain, the decisions they struggle to make, and the approval they still seek. Instead of inspiring them, it may create a sense of distance. They may pull back, become more reserved, or interpret your behavior in ways that justify their discomfort. This reaction is not about you being unapproachable, but about the internal conflict they experience in your presence. At times, you may find yourself questioning whether you should soften your confidence to make others feel more at ease. You may consider explaining yourself more, seeking approval where you do not need it, or adjusting your boundaries to avoid tension. But these adjustments come at a cost. They dilute the very stability that defines your confidence and create a version of yourself that is less aligned with who you truly are. In a world that constantly rewards noise, speed, and immediate responses, silence can feel out of place. Most interactions are filled with words, quick reactions, and an almost unconscious need to avoid pauses. People speak not only to communicate, but also to maintain comfort, to fill the space so that nothing feels uncertain or exposed. Within this rhythm, silence is often misinterpreted. It is seen as awkward, disengaged, or even judgmental. But when your natural way of being includes observation, reflection, and thoughtful pauses, you introduce something unfamiliar into that dynamic. When you listen more than you speak, you begin to notice details that others overlook. You pick up on tone, body language, inconsistencies, and the emotions behind the words. Your presence becomes attentive rather than reactive. This creates a different kind of interaction, one that is less about exchanging surface level information and more about understanding what is actually being expressed. However, this depth of attention can feel unsettling to those who are used to more casual or predictable exchanges. Silence, when paired with observation, has a unique effect on people. It removes the usual distractions that allow them to remain on the surface. When there are fewer words, there is more space. And in that space, people become more aware of themselves, how they sound, what they are saying, and what they might be revealing. For someone who is not used to that level of awareness, this can create discomfort. They may begin to feel as though they are being analyzed or evaluated, even if that is not your intention. Your silence can also disrupt the balance of control within a conversation. In many interactions, the person who speaks more often sets the tone and direction. They guide the flow, fill the gaps, and shape the narrative. But when you remain composed and selective with your words, you shift that dynamic. You do not rush to respond, and you do not feel the need to dominate the exchange. This can make others feel uncertain, as if they are carrying more of the interaction than they expected. That uncertainty can quickly turn into unease. Another layer of this experience comes from the weight of your words when you do choose to speak. Because you are not constantly talking, your words tend to carry more intention. You are more deliberate, more precise, and often more direct. This creates a contrast between the silence and the moments of expression. People may feel that what you say holds more significance, and that perception can make them more cautious. They may begin to filter themselves more, second-guess their statements, or avoid certain topics altogether. Observation also gives you a level of awareness that can feel exposing to others. You may notice patterns in behavior, contradictions in stories, or emotions that are not openly expressed. Even if you never point these things out, the way you engage can suggest that you see more than what is being said. This perception alone can create tension. People often feel more comfortable when they believe they are not being fully seen, when they can control what is revealed and what remains hidden. Your presence challenges that control in a quiet but powerful way. For many, this unease is not something they can easily articulate. They may not understand why they feel slightly uncomfortable or why they become more guarded around you. Instead of recognizing the impact of silence and observation, they may interpret it through more familiar labels. They might see you as distant, reserved, or difficult to read. These labels are not necessarily accurate, but they provide a way for them to make sense of what they are experiencing. From your perspective, this dynamic can feel confusing. You may simply be engaging in a way that feels natural to you, listening, observing, and speaking with intention, yet the reactions you receive do not always reflect understanding or appreciation. You may notice that some people open up deeply, while others withdraw or become more surface level in your presence. This contrast can create uncertainty about how you are being perceived. There can also be a subtle pressure to adapt, to fill the silence more, to speak more frequently, or to make others feel more at ease by aligning with their pace. But doing so may feel unnatural, as if you are moving away from your authentic way of interacting. Silence and observation are not signs of disconnection. They are forms of engagement that prioritize depth over speed, awareness over reaction, and meaning over volume. Independence is often admired from a distance. It is seen as strength, self-sufficiency, and emotional maturity. People speak highly of those who can stand on their own, make their own decisions, and navigate life without constant reliance on others. But admiration and comfort are not always the same. When independence is no longer an abstract idea, but a lived reality in someone standing right in front of them, it can begin to challenge the expectations that quietly shape most relationships. Many social connections are built on subtle forms of dependency. These dependencies are not always obvious or unhealthy, but they create a sense of familiarity. People expect certain responses, certain levels of availability, and certain emotional exchanges. They expect reassurance when they feel uncertain, agreement when they express opinions, and presence when they seek validation. These patterns form an unspoken structure that makes relationships predictable and, in many ways, easier to navigate. When you are independent, you do not rely on these structures in the same way. You do not need constant approval to feel secure in your decisions. You do not require frequent reassurance to maintain your sense of worth. You are comfortable spending time alone, making choices without external input, and standing by your perspective even when it differs from those around you. This creates a different kind of presence, one that is not easily influenced or shaped by the expectations of others. This difference can feel unsettling for people who are used to more interdependent dynamics. Your independence removes the usual points of control and reassurance that they rely on to feel connected. When you do not seek their approval, they may begin to question their role in your life. When you do not mirror their emotions or reactions, they may feel a lack of alignment. When you are content on your own, they may interpret it as distance rather than self-sufficiency. Independence also changes the way you engage in relationships. You are less likely to tolerate dynamics that feel unbalanced or draining. You do not stay in situations out of obligation or fear of being alone. You choose connections based on alignment rather than necessity. This selectiveness can be misinterpreted as detachment or lack of interest, especially by those who are used to more accommodating or dependent behavior. At the same time, your independence can highlight the dependencies that others may not have fully recognized in themselves. It brings attention to the ways in which they seek validation, rely on external opinions, or struggle with being alone. This reflection is not something you actively create, but it emerges naturally through contrast. And for someone who is not ready to confront these aspects of themselves, that reflection can feel uncomfortable. This discomfort often leads to subtle shifts in behavior. People may become more distant, less open, or more cautious in their interactions with you. They may interpret your independence as a sign that you do not need them, and instead of appreciating that freedom, they may feel unnecessary or disconnected. In some cases, they may even attempt to reintroduce familiar dynamics by seeking more validation, more reassurance, or more emotional engagement from you. For you, this can create a sense of misunderstanding. You may feel that you are simply being yourself, balanced, self-reliant, and grounded. Yet the reactions you receive suggest something else. There may be moments where you are perceived as unavailable, even when you are present, or as distant, even when you are engaged. This gap between intention and perception can be difficult to navigate, especially when you value connection but do not want to compromise your independence to maintain it. There is also a quiet pressure that can arise from this dynamic. You may feel the need to explain your choices, to reassure others that your independence is not a rejection of them, or to adjust your behavior to make the relationship feel more familiar. You may consider seeking validation you do not need, offering explanations you do not owe, or creating a sense of dependency that does not naturally exist simply to reduce the tension. But these adjustments often create an internal imbalance. They move you away from the very foundation that makes your independence genuine. Instead of acting from a place of self-trust, you begin to act from a place of accommodation. And over time, that shift can create a disconnect between who you are and how you present yourself in your relationships. Growth rarely announces itself in obvious ways. It does not always come with dramatic decisions or visible milestones that others can easily recognize. More often, it unfolds internally through subtle shifts in perspective, awareness, and priorities. You begin to think differently, question things you once accepted, and notice patterns that previously went unnoticed. These changes are quiet, almost invisible to the outside world, yet they reshape the way you relate to everything around you. And as this transformation deepens, it starts to influence your connections in ways that are not always immediately clear. One of the most complex aspects of growth is that it does not occur collectively. While you are evolving at your own pace, the people around you may remain in the same emotional or mental space. This creates a divergence that is not rooted in conflict but in direction. You may still care about the same people, share the same history, and value the same memories, but your present experience begins to feel different. Conversations that once flowed easily may now feel repetitive or lacking depth. Situations that once felt comfortable may begin to feel restrictive. The connection has not necessarily broken, but it no longer feels aligned in the same way. This misalignment often goes unspoken. There is rarely a clear moment where both sides acknowledge the shift. Instead, it shows up in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Responses become shorter, enthusiasm fades, and the natural rhythm of interaction begins to change. You may find yourself withdrawing slightly, not out of disinterest, but because you no longer resonate with certain dynamics. At the same time, others may sense this change without fully understanding it, leading them to adjust their behavior in subtle ways as well. As your awareness expands, so does your sensitivity to what aligns with your values and what does not. You become more intentional with your time, your energy, and your emotional investment. This intentionality can create a contrast with those who are still operating from habit or familiarity. What once felt like easy companionship may now require effort. What once felt like shared understanding may now feel like a gap that is difficult to bridge. This contrast is not about superiority or judgment. It is about difference in perception. This is where the sense of intimidation can quietly emerge. Your growth reflects a possibility that others may not have explored yet. It shows that change is not only possible but necessary for deeper understanding and fulfillment. For someone who is not ready to confront that idea, your presence can feel like a silent challenge. It is not that you are demanding anything from them, but the difference in your perspectives creates a form of tension that is difficult to ignore. They may begin to feel as though they are being measured against a standard they did not choose, even if that standard exists only in their own interpretation. In response to this discomfort, people may begin to create distance, not in a dramatic or intentional way, but through gradual shifts in engagement. They may avoid deeper conversations, steer interactions toward familiar topics, or limit the time they spend in your presence. This is not always a conscious decision. Often it is a way of maintaining their sense of comfort without having to directly address the underlying change. The distance becomes a form of protection, allowing them to remain within the boundaries of what feels familiar and manageable. For you, this process can be both confusing and isolating. You may feel that you have not done anything to create this distance, yet it continues to grow. There can be a sense of loss, not necessarily of the people themselves, but of the ease and simplicity that once defined those relationships. You may question whether your growth has come at the cost of connection, whether becoming more aware has made it harder to relate to others in the same way as before. There is also a subtle temptation to adjust yourself in order to restore that sense of familiarity. You may consider holding back your thoughts, avoiding certain topics, or re-engaging in patterns that you have already outgrown. These adjustments can create a temporary sense of closeness, but they often come with an internal cost. You begin to suppress parts of yourself that have already evolved, creating a disconnect between who you are and how you interact with others. This disconnect can feel heavier than the distance you were trying to avoid, as it requires you to ignore the very growth that shaped your current perspective. There comes a moment when you begin to see things more clearly, not just the way others respond to you, but the quiet patterns behind those reactions. What once felt like rejection starts to reveal itself as something else. What once made you question your worth begins to show you your difference. And slowly, almost without noticing, you stop interpreting every distance as a failure on your part. Because the truth is, not everyone will understand you, and not everyone is meant to. Some will feel challenged by your authenticity, unsettled by your silence, unsure around your confidence, or distant from your growth. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are reflecting something they are not ready to face within themselves. And while it is natural to want connection, it is equally important to recognize when connection requires you to become less of who you are. You were never meant to shrink your presence to make others feel comfortable. You were never meant to dilute your thoughts, soften your clarity, or question your independence just to maintain a sense of belonging that no longer aligns with you. What feels like intimidation to some is simply the expression of who you have become through your experiences, your awareness, and your willingness to grow. And the more you understand this, the less you will feel the need to chase approval or explain yourself. You begin to accept that distance is sometimes a natural outcome of alignment, not a sign of failure. You start to see that the people who truly connect with you are not those who feel threatened by your presence, but those who feel inspired by it, those who meet you with the same level of honesty, depth, and self-awareness. So instead of asking, "Why do people pull away?" you begin to ask a different question. Who stays and why? And in that shift, everything changes.